Hello, hello, and welcome to another round of Sprout Sessions. I'm Vera Flores, and I work in community and brand advocacy here at Sprout, and I'm thrilled to be moderating this session today with Greg. Our goal with Sprout Sessions is to bring our industry together and arm you with insights to deepen your strategy and gain new perspective on topics that are truly relevant to your brand's bottom line. We hope you can take away some actionable tips on how to apply these best practices to your social strategy, as well as inspirations for ways to grow. We'll jump into the content in just a second, but first let's go over a few housekeeping items. The sessions will be recorded and you can access them immediately following the presentation on our YouTube page. If you need to step out or head out early, don't worry, you'll be able to access everything after the session. Get social with it. We encourage all of you to engage with us and your fellow professionals on social. Tweet at Sprout Social or use the hashtag Sprout Sessions to ask questions, share your favorite bits of content, or just follow along with the conversation. Lastly, we'll have a Q&A at the end of this presentation, so feel free to ask questions throughout the session by using the chat box to the right of your screen. Now, let's get this session started. Allow me to pass it over to Greg Tirico of Bamboo by Sprout Social to introduce themselves.
Thank you very much, Vera. This is Greg Tirico. Prior to joining the Bamboo team here at Sprout Social, I've spent a majority of my career in digital marketing roles inside of Global 500 organizations. So when it comes to social media policies, I've written a few, not an overwhelming number, let's be honest. We don't want to write too many in our careers. I've written a few and I've learned how to use them to my advantage. So we're going to be talking today about how to take that social media policy of yours and turn it from what might be considered a liability into an advantage, particularly as it relates to your broad employee workforce. So let's get into it. First, a little bit of a statistic. This might be different in your organization. Of course, this is just an average based on a survey that was conducted. About 47% of your employees, that's a safe assumption, are using the social networks today to connect with their customers. And if you think about your own personal habits, this makes a lot of sense, right? You've got a public profile on Twitter. You may have some public information that you post regularly on Facebook, depending on your use case there. And you most certainly have what I would refer to as quasi-public presence on LinkedIn. Just before the session started, we were talking about the many seemingly random connections that we receive on LinkedIn. I'm a believer in connecting with everyone. If you send me a connection on LinkedIn, I'm more than happy to have a conversation with you or connect with you. And that makes me one of the employees very likely that falls into this bucket. I connect with customers on a regular basis in the social media space. So if half of your employee base on average is already doing this, have you given them the guardrails they need? Have you set expectations with them around what's appropriate and what's not appropriate? Chances are a lot of that activity starts with your social media policy. It also starts with some of the regulatory agencies that are out there. And so for the remainder of today's Sprout session, we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive, not too terribly deep. These are quick sessions meant to get you the information you need to take a couple of key moments forward. And we'll talk about what stands in your way between that social media policy being a liability and being an advantage. So when we think about the end result of a policy that really does empower employees to talk with customers in the social media space, what we're really talking about is a term that's often used, which is employee advocacy. So if we think about the benefits of employee advocacy, number one, right? Obviously, if you get a large number of people talking about your organization, your efforts, the great work that your company is doing, it makes sense that awareness about your efforts will increase. So it's kind of an obvious one there, right? But there are a couple of other on the screen that I wanted to spend some time talking about. Social recruiting is maybe not as obvious of one, but it's certainly a sometimes byproduct of your advocacy efforts. And as a result of your employees talking about the great work that your company is doing in the social media space, people will be interested in working for your company. Now, your talent acquisition team, your broader HR team, they probably already have some kind of referral bonus program in place. If they don't, they're definitely thinking about one. These referral bonuses sometimes come in monetary forms. They can take other forms as well. The whole point is your talent acquisition team, your broader HR team, they want referrals from existing employees. A players attract A players. So if you've got a great employee base, you want people that are connected to those employees to walk in the door and say, I'd love to work here. What's interesting to me about social recruiting and how it relates to employee referrals is a statistic most recently from a JobVite survey that said only 7% of the applicants that come through the door for a job come from employee referrals. But a full 40% of the people that you hire are employee referrals. So from that little tiny 7% pool, almost half of all the hires you make come from employee referrals. If you empower your employees through policy, through guardrails, through education to speak about your company in the social space, you're also empowering them to attract future candidates for employee roles. The third one on the list today, creating conversations. This, to me, is the most important one. We can talk about awareness and social recruiting. We'll talk about ambiguity here in just a moment. Conversations. That's why I have a Twitter account. That's why I have a LinkedIn account. That's why I have a Facebook account. Conversations. I'm not interested in simply broadcasting information out to these networks all day long. I want genuine conversations. Your brand wants genuine conversations. Your employees can help you get there. So if you're thinking that your social strategy needs more of a conversational tone, if you'd like to see more engagement across the social space about the efforts of your organization, it makes a lot of sense that you'd want to turn to advocacy, to a proper social policy, one that empowers employees to help you with those conversations. The last one is important. It's important for me from a legal perspective. Removing ambiguity around what's acceptable and what's not, that's the number one reason right now, the word ambiguity, that only 47% of your employees are speaking with customers in the social media space. What about the other 53%? What about the efforts of the 47% that are doing it today? Are they everything they can give it, or are they kind of wading into it and they're not too sure? Why are you not getting the full benefit of the great work that your company is doing, the fact that your employees love working for your organization? It's because there's too much ambiguity. Many employees have probably read an article about somebody who did something stupid on Twitter and got fired, right? And they read that and it gets cemented in their brain, right? They think to themselves, well, I don't know if my organization would allow me to do this. And, I'll make it a little more specific with an example. An organization that I work for used to have a very strict policy about not wanting to promote articles that mentioned competitors. So if I read an article in a trade publication and I wanted to share it in the social media space, I had to really scan that article for mentions of competitive activity, because if it was in there, I knew that my PR team didn't want me necessarily talking about that article. Right? That's ambiguity because I wasn't sure. And using an advocacy program, using technology to your advantage, using a social media policy to your benefit as opposed to as a liability will help remove that ambiguity, and your employees will feel more empowered to help you in the social media space and talk about the great things that your organization is doing. So I'm allowed to make one duh statement a day. I allow that of myself every single day. Here is my duh statement. Strategy is critical, right? Now, let's dive into that a little bit, because that, as I mentioned, is kind of a duh statement. You're probably thinking to yourselves, yeah, I get it, Greg, thanks. So both around your advocacy efforts and how you communicate to employees what appropriate activities are in the social media space, you need a strategy around those. And we don't have enough time today, unfortunately, to talk about what business strategy looks like when it comes to advocacy efforts or employee communications efforts. But I will tell you that if you take a step back and you think about what your overarching goals are, what it is that you would like to accomplish, how you can line up resources to get there, if you don't already have a strategy, one will reveal itself. So do me a favor, and as a starting point, instead of after this session going directly to your social media policy and thinking to yourself, we can update this and we can make it great for employees, take a step back, and think about what kind of strategy you want in support of your overarching company objectives. Now, once you do get there, there are a couple of things that your employees need to hear. First and foremost, if you're in a regulated industry, your employees need education around what's acceptable and what's not. If you're in what I would classify as a highly regulated industry, there are penalties worse than the loss of one's job. So you need to make sure that your employees hear you loud and clear, particularly in those highly regulated industries. But if you just know that you operate in a regulated environment in general, you want to make sure that you keep your employees educated on industry regulations. And that's because if you rewind the clock by 10 years, well, that's way too long. 5 years, 3 years, Industry regulations have changed. So make sure that your employees hear what current regulations are. And then number two, company-specific rules, right? You want to keep employees up to date on what the social media policy and what broader organizational policies say about acceptable behavior in the social media space, especially when it comes to speaking with customers, potentially prospects, influencers, and anybody else that they may actually run up against in the social media space. So industry regulations, company-specific rules, this is what your employees need to hear about. This is that ambiguous area that we spoke about a little bit earlier, not having 100% confidence as an employee around industry regulations or around company-specific rules will stop me from having a positive impact with our customers, with our prospects in the social media space. So when I look at social media policies that are not a liability and can be used to your advantage, I see a couple of themes. Number one, and this is important to consider, right? Social media is subject to the same rules that apply to traditional media, particularly when it comes to endorsements. If you think about paying influencers to hawk one of your products, if you think about the ways in which you strike up paid relationships today from a traditional media perspective, in the social media space, don't think that it's different just because it's on Twitter, it's only 140 characters, or just because it's on Snapchat and it'll be here today, gone tomorrow. Please treat the policy themes inside of your social media policy the same as you would any other traditional media outreach, and you'll be on the straight and narrow. Two, and this is, I may have just broken my rule and made my second statement of the day. You need these procedures accurately documented. And what I'm getting at here, if you read past the bullet point, right, is that you have a legal team. You have a legal team in place because that legal team supports you and your business. Your lawyers inside of your organization are here to protect you. They're not here to make your life difficult. They're here to make sure that you do everything you need to do to protect both yourself and your employees. Make sure that as a general theme, your policy around social media activity is well documented and vetted by your legal staff. And then third, another theme that I see quite regularly is training on their responsibilities as dictated inside of the policy. You might have an e-learning system. You may have done some casual training with employees using a recorded video. You might have to take a training session every year around internet security and what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. Use the same mechanisms that you have in place today to also deliver information to your employee base at large around what their responsibilities are should they choose to participate in the social media space. And if you're going all in and spinning up an employee advocacy program and giving employees technology that will empower them, then this is a pretty important part of that overall rollout. And then lastly, there are a couple of things that you want to consider that we don't have enough time to get into today in great detail. And those ideas are all around disclosing and disclaiming. So take a look when you have some time, if you're not familiar with these words, at the ideas of entanglement and adoption. And just do a little bit of cursory research on Google to educate yourself on what disclose and disclaim means and what entanglement and adoption mean related to employee activity in the social media space. There's lots of documentation out there, and it's very easy to train yourself up quickly on these words, what they mean, so that when you do speak to your legal team and you do start to write policies around acceptable behavior for employees in the social media space, you understand some of the lingo that you're going to be running up against. So why have these policies in place if you are in a regulated industry? If you're in a regulated industry, there are a couple of watchdog groups that are going to be keenly interested in what you, your organization, and your employees are up to in the social media space. This isn't a scare session. I'm not out there to spread FUD and make sure that your employees never do anything on Twitter at all, ever, or even let alone have an account. They should feel comfortable doing it. And actually, these watchdog groups, that term watchdog may actually paint them in a negative light. Not at all. If you are regulated in an industry by the FTC or by FINRA, SEC, FFIEC, if those acronyms mean anything to you, each one of those websites has some very clear guidance on what's acceptable social media use, considering their experience. They even have warnings that they've issued to other organizations. They have case studies around what they consider acceptable and not acceptable. Use these watchdog groups to your advantage. They're here to help you, just like your legal team is. They want to make sure that companies are operating on the straight and narrow. In particular, the FTC, they have some great information around disclosure activity and what's acceptable. So if any of these acronyms mean anything to you, you run up against them on a regular basis, you operate in a regulated or a highly regulated environment, keep in mind that these groups have information available to you that will only help you, not hinder you when you're looking to create social media policies that are advantageous for your organization and not a liability. With that, the easiest way to stay ahead of regulations is with technology. Regulations are changing rather quickly, and think about an environment in which those regulations are changing so quickly, it requires an individual or a team of individuals to ensure that employees always stay on the right side of the regulations. If you had to educate every employee on what all of those changing regulations were, then we're not talking about employee advocacy. We're not talking about employee use of social media. We're talking about full-time, constant education of employees regarding regulations and how to stay ahead of them. And I don't think that's the goal of any organization. Last time I checked, none of us today on the line make money because our employees stay ahead of regulations full-time. That's probably a nice end result of something that we've done regarding training programs. So when it comes to staying ahead of regulations, the easiest way to do it is with technology. And that's because you can filter through all of the guardrails that employees need to know about and bring proper information into a single environment. That proper information, that vetted information, that curated information will make sure that employees do not try to operate on their own, and it will give them the guidance that they need to feel empowered to then participate in the social media space. So what the heck am I talking about? Let's get into a couple of the details here as we wrap up today's session. A proper technology solution, the right technology solution, will ensure that your marketing material, your content marketing efforts, those efforts that you then push out to employees are consistent with regulations in your market. It could be regulations from some of the watchdog groups we talked about. It could just be regulations that you believe are appropriate, and as a result, you call them policies inside of your social media policy, right? What this also does is it really helps to separate business and personal communications. Now, I don't want to lead everyone to believe that with that statement, all of your employees should have a business Twitter account and a personal Twitter account. If we've been doing this for any period of time as digital marketers, certainly we've received that question before. Should I have a separate Twitter account for my business? My personal answer is no, but that's my personal answer. What I'm really saying here about separating business and personal communications is that you know that you can provide employees with the appropriate business communications. And then inside of your social media policy, you can let them know that as a result of using their Twitter account for business communications, there's a certain standard that you'd like to hold them to regarding their personal communications. Right? What I really like about the right technology solution also is that when it comes to status updates and articles to be shared out into the social media space, you can provide employees with lots of options. For example, imagine an environment in which you provide employees with a single article that they can share, but inside of that article, there are 10 status updates that employees can choose from. Which one fits a different employee's voice is up to them to select from. And that's the flexibility inside of a technology solution that you're looking for. You don't want to create a bunch of spam bots by providing employees with the exact same status update to say about the exact same article every day of the week. Instead, you want them to have their own voice, most certainly, but you want to stand those guardrails up so that employees know that they're operating within the bounds of what's considered to be acceptable. Now, in extreme cases, in the last bullet point on the screen, you may consider locking a status update using technology so that employees can only say one thing about a particular aspect of your business. And the example I like to use here is financial disclosure. Let's say your organization had a really stellar quarter, right? You've reported to the SEC, the stock market loves what they hear. You're proud of the work that you've done, and you want your employees to be able to share that. But you don't want your employees riffing on it and using their own perspective. So in that case, the right technology solution would allow you to take that extra step and lock down a status update and say, look, we want you to share in the glory that is our financial results for this past quarter. When you do, you should say this specific thing. Otherwise, the SEC is going to come a knocking, and that's not great. So a couple of takeaways here, right? Your employees are already active in the social space. And so what you're looking to do with a proper social media policy is not to discourage that behavior. You want to empower your employees with a policy that lets them know that they're doing the right thing. Of course, my dust statement, strategy will help to clear up a lot of confusion, because you're going to take a step back and you're going to say, what is it that we're looking to accomplish from a business perspective? How do we get there? What are the resources that we can line up? And what is the technology solution that we want to put in place? Right? I see a lot of policy themes that are influenced by regulatory agencies. So if you're in a regulated or a highly regulated industry, please rely on those watchdog groups that we talked about to provide initial guidance for you. And lastly, the best way to stay ahead of regulations in a regulated industry or otherwise is to use technology to provide guardrails for your employees. And with that being said, I'd like to thank all of you for a very quick session for Sprout Sessions today. Again, my name is Greg Tirico, and I appreciate your attention. Vera, back to you.
Thanks, Greg. What an interesting stat about employee referrals. I think this really speaks to how word of mouth and social is so important for employees to show all the great things that are happening at a company. So friends, you're welcome to stick around for the next 10 minutes to ask any questions you have. And remember, you'll be able to access the recording of this session following the completion of the Q&A. So let's get to our first question. Greg, this comes from Kristen on Twitter. Do you have any recommendations or best practices for social policy templates?
I do. Kristen, that's a great question. So template examples. Start with an organization that I was an active member of when I was on the brand side, called socialmedia.org. Socialmedia.org now has an archived page. They don't keep it up to date anymore. So there's a big banner that says, in effect, this page isn't kept up to date anymore. But they have a disclosures page. It's very easy to find with a Google search. It's probably socialmedia.org/disclosures. And inside of that page, you'll find a whole host of resources to get you started. That's one place. There's an author by the name of Chris Boudreau. Chris and Susan Emmerich of IBM, they wrote a book, and as a result of that book, Chris started a website called Social Media Governance. So separate from socialmedia.org and their disclosures page, also use the social media governance website, probably socialmediagovernance.com. Chris has collected a whole host of social media policies from large corporations, and that should give you a great head start. That's a fantastic question, Kristen.
Awesome. Thanks, Greg. That's really helpful. I think that when you're starting to create social policies from the beginning, it's kind of hard to know where to start. So appreciate you answering that so thoughtfully. So got another question from YouTube from Wigdor LLP, and they ask, if I allow employees to use social media during work hours, how can I ensure that they are using it for legitimate business purposes and not as a distraction?
Yeah, that's a really common question. So there's a subtle answer, and then there's a not so nuanced answer. And I'm going to start with the sort of the subtle nuanced answer. First and foremost, there has to be some trust in place, right? Trusting your employees, much like my children who are growing very quickly before my eyes, there's some trust there as well as I give them more and more room to make mistakes in their lives, right? Trust in your employees, because we're not talking about children. Well, jokingly, maybe we are, but no, right? Trust in adults, trust in those employees that you've hired is a requirement for any activity leading in the direction of social media and conversations with your customers. That's the sort of subtle, nuanced answer. Things you can do to ensure that you've protected yourself, right, include very strictly spelling out inside of your social media policy what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. That's number one. Number two, put a technology solution in place that effectively says, if you are going to participate in the social media space, do it through this tool. And that way you're able to provide curated information to employees so that they don't go off script too much and they stick within the bounds of what you consider to be acceptable as an organization. And then number three, I would, if it's much of a concern and you are in a highly regulated industry, I would recommend bringing in an auditing tool to ensure that everybody stays on the straight and narrow. So trust is the subtle, sort of softer answer, but it's combined with the policy, the technology, and the auditing that will ensure that you feel comfortable and are protected, particularly in highly regulated industries.
Awesome. Thank you, Greg. I think that it's really important to highlight trust amongst employees. So great answer there. So along the same lines of policies, we've got another question. Judith asks, when you're creating social media policies, how do you enforce them? And do you enforce them as an employer? And if so, how do you do that?
Yeah, so I have some experience here that I will draw from personally. Social media policies themselves are actually quite easy to create. I hesitated there a little bit because I wanted to make sure that you heard me clearly. I did just say that social media policies are easy to create, and they are. Kristen asked the question earlier about what resources you can start with, and there are quite a few out there that will give you not just templates, but they'll give you actual company social media policies to begin with, right? The creation of those policies is one thing. Inside of that question, though, there was also, I think more importantly, the idea of enforcement of those policies. The number one thing that I've seen in my career, anytime I've been in any kind of a regulated environment. So for example, during the beginning of my career, I worked in the manufacturing and distribution space. I walked in and out of shop floors all day long. And as a result, I was educated on a regular basis through e-learning modules from my employer about the fact that I needed steel tip boots, right? If I walked into certain areas of certain shops, I needed a hard hat. I shouldn't be around big equipment that could take my arm off, right? And so what they do is they employ a regular series of training to make sure that they can say that, you know, we've checked the boxes here and we have done what we believe to be appropriate to train our employees up. And it's the same with social media policy. Nobody's going to lose their arm because of a lack of adherence to a social media policy. But in this case, what you can do is use any kind of training apparatus that you have in place today to bring your employees up to speed on that policy. I would encourage you to try to make it as fun as possible, right? I was joking earlier today about just the idea of this topic in general and how it was the best Sprout session given yet this week. There's a little bit of sarcasm in my statement there. This is important stuff, but it's not sexy. It's not cutting edge technology. You want to make sure that your employees understand that there is benefit to them participating in the social media space. And as a result, there's some opportunity for them. And this policy is the driving force behind it. So two thoughts there, right? One, the creation of the policy itself is rather easy. Two, the enforcement of that policy, you can use any training apparatus you have in place today to take advantage of.
Thanks, Greg. That was really insightful. I think that when you're setting up policies, it may seem a little bit scary at first, but creating these policies will help employees really get out there and create a little bit more brand exposure as well for these employers. So we have time for one last question, and this is from YouTube from the Gift of Life Marrow Registry. Along the lines of advocacy programs, many times employers might have or brands might have ambassadors. So they ask, how do you suggest engaging remote college ambassadors?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm glad that we're ending on this one. So remote college ambassadors, right? There is something to be said about an individual's feelings towards a university, a collegiate program. There's more to it than just an employer or just a place where they, it could be, depending on the scope of this ambassador program, a place where they earn their education, right? Engaging remote college ambassadors is best done via technology, obviously. You want to make sure that as remote ambassadors, they feel connected to the spirit and the energy of, be it a campus or a series of campuses across the country. I would take, personally, right, I would take a rather fun, lighthearted approach to all of the content that I put in front of remote college ambassadors. And the reason I say that is because there's enough serious stuff in life outside of college itself. And in fact, college can seem quite serious as well. The idea of being young at heart, use that to your advantage. The idea of being full of of life and questions and curiosity, take that and run with it, right? And what you'll find is that these remote ambassadors start to feel the culture of the central location. Sure, this can be true of any organization, right? The reason that I was so drawn to this question is because it was particularly about college ambassadors. So use those technologies to make sure that the remote folks feel that energy and excitement, and do it in a fun, lighthearted way. There are plenty of serious things out there in life. You don't necessarily have to be one of them. Hopefully that answers your question. If you do want to dig a little bit deeper into that, you see my Twitter handle on the screen, and I'm more than happy to have a conversation with you afterwards as well. Vera?
Awesome. Thank you, Greg. Those are really, really great insights, and really love your point about making it fun and light, especially for a younger crowd. It doesn't always have to be so serious, especially if you're a nonprofit or organization that's doing something really good for the social good. Well, friends, it looks like our time has come to an end. And on behalf of Sprout, we want to thank all of you for attending this session. And again, thank you to Greg for your time. Keep your eyes peeled. We're going to compile some of the major takeaways from this session and share it with all of you. Feel free to continue the conversation on social media using the hashtag #SproutSessions, or reach out to Greg on Twitter. From all of us at Sprout, have a great summer.